So before we begin, a little bit about myself. I've been doing this stuff for a while, and I know what I'm doing to a significant degree. So, well, here I am. And thank you for that introduction, Harshit. I hope New Zealand does pan out on time, but well, um, who can say? But anyway, so yeah, before we begin, um, I'll give you a lowdown on exactly what is the process that we're going to follow. Firstly, I will be clarifying certain very important aspects of an MUN conference, especially those that are relevant and important to how research is structured, how research is basically what process do you have to follow when you're conducting research, aspects that are important to that. I'll be clarifying stuff on those aspects. Now, considering this is all very new, this is the first time we're having a training session over an online medium. If you guys have doubts, please leave them in the chat. I'm reading the chat simultaneously. If I do come across a doubt that is important to be addressed immediately, I will address them immediately. If not, I will address them towards the end. And in case I miss any doubts, you can let me know that I've missed any doubts. Um, so yeah, before we start research, um, I need to get an understanding of what you feel an MUN committee does. Uh, what exactly happens in an MUN committee? Anybody can answer.
You discuss an issue, whatever is the agenda, and then you come up with solutions, and the solution is written down.
Okay, you discuss an agenda and you come up with solutions. Is okay. Yes, that is a simplistic way of looking at it, and in a simplistic way, it is correct. Now, let's try to delve a little deeper. You say we discuss, right? How anybody can answer again, just that one person does not have to answer, anybody can answer. So when you say we discuss, in what way do we discuss?
In a debate form.
What do you mean when you say debate form?
As in delegates put forth their so and so countries delegate put
Hmm.
forth their views or their according to their foreign policies they put forth what they play a role or what their point of view, yeah. And if another delegate country delegate has a counter view, they could go through that.
Okay. Fair enough. That does happen. Um, okay, we have an answer in the chat that says in a diplomatic manner. Yes, that is the again that is the manner. Right now, what we're looking at is the um, actual discussion itself. So one aspect that was mentioned by Nishita is the fact that there are a lot of viewpoints, and at several points, those viewpoints contradict each other. And because they contradict each other, there is conflict and they need to be worked out. Am I right in my assessment of what you said, Nishita?
Yeah, that's why I meant debate.
Right. That's why exactly. That's why you said debate. Perfect. Perfect. Right. Any other answers? Any alternative answers?
Yes, we have something else as well. So,
Yeah.
considering the agenda as member nations, we try to look at every angle of the issue.
Right. Of course, that is important. I mean, I wouldn't say every angle. I would say only the relevant angles, but yeah, every relevant angle needs to be considered. Now, what was mentioned was the fact that we debate, right? There are viewpoints, there are counter viewpoints, and those countering viewpoints need to be resolved through debate. And often that does happen. However, that is something that we need clarity upon in order to be able to, in order to know exactly what it is that our research is going to entail of. Uh, in many ways, when you're in an MUN conference, when you're in a committee, you are not debating per se. Yes, it becomes a debate. You're not there to debate. You're there to discuss, yes, but in a proper format, in a particular format. What is that format? That format is a meeting. Ultimately, a committee is not a for and against debate. A committee is not two sides against each other. It becomes that way. But what a committee is a meeting of it's a summit meeting of nations that are there to discuss a global issue or something that basically has relevance to all of them as a whole, which is why uh, we don't call it a committee topic. We call it a committee agenda. Why do we call it an agenda? Meetings have agendas, debates have topics, right? There's a reason for there's a reason and there's a certain depth to everything that one does in an MUN conference, and that needs to be at least not completely, but at least to a basic level that needs to be understood before we go into research, right? Now, so yeah, now that we're clear as to with regards to what exactly it is that we're going to be doing, we're not there to put another viewpoint down. No, obviously we have to defend our viewpoint, we have to defend our foreign policy, and our research will be in a manner that defends our foreign policy. But our goal is not to bring the others down. Ultimately, it is competition with collaboration, right? So you have to make sure that everybody collaborates, but in a manner where your contribution or your engagement in that particular collaboration is one, the most, two, the most prominent, and third and most important, the most effective. You can say you can be the only speaker for about half the MAM session, but if nothing you say makes any sense, or if nothing you say contributes in any manner to committee, then I as a chairperson would not really care about what you said, because there was no contribution. There is no there's a lot of noise and no substance, basically, right? So your goal is not only to have noise, your goal is also to have substance, right? And that is where research comes in. Noise is, well, your diction, your ability to conduct yourself in a committee, etc., etc., etc. But your substance comes from two things: one, research, and two, an understanding of that research. And when I say understanding, it's not just understanding of that research as in, okay, I understand what I've read, but you also understand why you've read it. You understood how what you've read contributes to your overall narrative, and you've understood exactly how it is that you're going to use what you've read. If you've read something and you're not going to use it, it's useless. If you've read something and it's not relevant to your topic, it's useless, right? So you don't just have to research hard, you have to research smart as well, which is also something that we'll be delving into more in detail when I explain to you exactly how um, argumentation in an MUN, at least the basics of argumentation in MUN, because Neelika is going to be handling argumentation majorly, at least the basics of how argumentation works, which I will be explaining in order to explain to you why that level or that method of research is advisable. Okay. So yeah, now that we've analyzed why it's called an agenda, what are we there for? Now that we understand what we're there for, the next thing we need to understand is, when we are speaking, uh, what are the most important aspects of our speech? Any takers, any answers? Am I audible?
Yeah, very much.
Yes. So does anybody want to answer?
Yeah, I guess confidence in the speech matters.
Okay, confidence helps you deliver. Okay, fine. Right now we're looking at substantive aspects. But yeah, confidence is also important, because you wouldn't be confident if you're not confident in what you've read, you won't be confident in what you say. So yes, in a manner, you need to be confident when you're speaking, and you can only be confident when you're speaking when you're confident in what you've read. So yeah, another answer that we've got is from Tanveer. It is the statistics and facts to prove your point. Okay. Yes, statistics and facts are important. However, there are caveats, and we'll be getting into those caveats in detail later. But yes, that is important. Jay says logical reasoning, and Pooja says convincing power. Again, convincing power, conviction only comes if you're convinced in what you're saying in the first place. And that comes from an understanding of your material, right? Logical reasoning, again, it's a correct answer. Again, depends on an understanding of your subject, understanding of your subject material. Relevance to the topic, again, yes, very important. Also depends on an understanding of the concept at hand, the understanding of what you've read, basically. Facts mentioned should be politically correct. Yes, in the current environment, political correctness is important. especially considering you're in a summit where you're simulating a meeting of international leaders, then yes, I wouldn't call it politically correct. I would call it diplomatic and as would be expected from people of that stature. Um, Strategic and pertinent relevant points. Yes, your points have to be strategic. They have to be managed in a manner that is consistent with a proper flow of information, and they have to be pertinent. If they're not pertinent, what's the point of saying it in the first place, right? So yes, even those are very important factors. And again, so one thing you might have noticed from all of these answers, and if we try to abstract these answers to uh, just one level below, um, all of them rely on an understanding of the subject matter. Literally, all of them rely on an understanding of the subject matter. So yes, when you're talking about discussion, when you're talking about substance, there are two things that are incredibly important. The first thing is an understanding of what you're saying. And what's the second thing? If anybody wants to take a guess. Okay, since we have no takers, I'll tell you what the second thing is. The first thing is an understanding of what you're saying, and the second thing is structure of what you're saying. You cannot, anybody cannot make a convincing argument, make an argument that is easily comprehensive unless they don't comprehend it well themselves. And what is an argument? An argument is basically a conclusion that you are proposing on the basis of you logically analyzing and logically reasoning um, some factual basis with your understanding of the world at large, right? There's a factual basis, you analyze it, you think about it, you understand it with logical reasoning. You apply your logical reasoning to that factual base, and ultimately, once all of that is done, you come to a conclusion, right? Or you come to an opinion or anything. At least that's how it's supposed to be. If we don't take the bandwagon effect into consideration, which is usually quite prominent in society, but in a debate, in a structured discussion, usually has to be a logical analysis of a factual base that helps you arrive at a conclusion, right? So yes, that's structure basically. The reason structure is important is because the causation that leads to your policy or your in a more informal setting opinion, in a more formal setting like an MUN, your policy or your proposal, right? The causation and the analysis that goes into it is equally important as the position itself. Because if you're not aware of the analysis of your position, then how will you be able to convince somebody with a conflicting point of view in the first place? You wouldn't be able to. And hence that is also incredibly important. So yeah, two things that make up an argument. First is understanding of source material, and second is structure and how you, well, present the source material, and also structure and how you think of the source material. Um, okay, right. So Ashish and Yuvraj, I'll be addressing your doubts later because they don't need to be, they're agenda specific doubts, so they don't need to be addressed immediately.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's not a doubt. It's just my statement. Actually, a
Okay.
contradiction to what Faisal just said right there.
Okay. Um, Fine. Let's refrain from having debates in the chat. We can have these discussions once my material is done because I'm reading it simultaneously. So especially when there are such large statements, I can't read it and speak simultaneously. So let's keep the discussions to a verbal forum. We can use the text for doubts for now. Um, so yeah, what was I saying? Yes, what I was saying is two things: understanding and structure. Perfect. Now, my goal here is to firstly teach you how to find that substance and how to understand that substance. That is my primary goal in this particular session, and that is my agenda for this meeting, so to speak. Um, so yeah, how do we begin? Just a second, I'll just share my screen. I have the PPT ready. Yes, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Perfect.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. Right. So again, thanks to the organizing committee of Park Street for making my job a little easier by providing me the material beforehand. But yeah, let's go. So yeah, now what do you understand? Okay, what information do you gather? And how to understand it is something I'll be explaining to you through my explanations. So keep your notepads, notebooks, etc. ready, because you might need to take some notes. Although the PowerPoint itself is quite text heavy, so I don't think most of it should be an issue. But yeah, now how do you start with MUN research? Okay, now when again all of so these aspects you see here, the five aspects, all of them do not have to be taken in isolation. They're all they're all incredibly dependent on one another and derive a lot of their merit and a lot of their relevance from one another. So when you're researching, if you're researching one aspect, you might find something that affects your understanding of some other aspect. So it's not something to be scared of. Just keep your mind open towards it, because it will happen. Okay. Now, when in an MUN, when we are proposing something, or when there is any policy of ours that we are pitching on the table or we're putting on the table, or even paperwork for that matter, there are two things that are necessary. First is it has to be obviously relevant to the agenda, and it has to encompass the stuff that you've discussed in committee. And the second thing is anything you pitch, okay, literally anything you pitch, any proposal you make, any observation you have, the manner in which you express that observation or the proposal that you make, literally, whether it be procedural in nature or substantive in nature, all of it has to be backed legally by public international law. So when you're making a proposal, when you are pitching something as a part of a draft resolution, there has to be a legal backing to it. It has to be allowed through some international law. Okay, now in international law in many ways is different from domestic law. So an understanding of that difference is also very important, and I'll explain those differences as we go. So now, what are the aspects that we need to research? The first one is your country profile. Second one is background of the agenda. Third one is your country policy, which is basically a foreign policy on that particular agenda. The fourth one is any past international actions. International actions in this regard would be uh, legally binding resolutions, etc. We'll get into more detail later. And fifth is possible solutions. Now, possible solutions is an aspect that sometimes is researched. I mean, some of it is researched and some of it is just your creativity. So we'll understand how to research that as well. So yeah, your country profile. Just a second, I'll need to move this up top. Uh, okay, it's fine. Right. So yeah, to get started, it is important to understand the country you're representing. Obviously, if you don't understand the country itself, how will you put forth those countries' positions in an international forum, right? So, what aspects of a country would you research? Um, Now, all of these factors you see here are not do all, be all, end all. Okay. The only reason you need to know these, now each of them are relevant in varying degrees, and I will explain. I will tell you how relevant each one of them is. But yeah, so yeah, first one is geography, right? The region where your country lies, the neighbors that your country has, the geographical features that your country has, and the general climate. Now, this particular aspect is not very relevant, but it's basically good to know. Why is it good to know? Because in case you're being creative with any proposals that you're making, you can't really make a proposal that is uh, if it's a proposal that affects your country, you can't really make a proposal that affects your country without knowing what your country is like, right? I mean, you wouldn't try to have uh, solar power plants in London because London is almost always overcast, right? There is not much sun that London gets. You wouldn't have a hydroelectric power plant in a desert, right? So you need to understand the features that your nation has, how those features can be exploited in case they have to be exploited, and what all is relevant as per your country's natural, well, built up makeup. Also, the region where your country lies. Why? Because there are several regional agreements, there are several regional organizations that come into the picture as well, and your neighbors. Who are your neighbors? Whom do you share land borders with? Whom do you share, or well, if you're a part of a peninsula, or if you're a part of well, a bay, right? Then are there any other nations that share that particular region with you, right? It is important to know all of that. Why? Because you'll know where you stand, exactly where you stand, quite literally, and that is something important to know when you're going in. Now, the second one is incredibly important. However, some sub aspects are more important than others, which is your sovereignty related information, how your country originated. Okay, firstly, what is sovereignty? Anybody wants to take a guess at what sovereignty is?
The stance of a country internationally, its own independent status.
Its own independent status. Okay. Okay, guys, just a second. I think I'm getting a call. Just give me a minute. I'll be back. Okay. Apologies for the this thing. Just give me a minute. This is an important one. I can't really miss it.
Okay, anyways, until then, so
Yeah. Hello.
sovereignty is basically a certain sense of respect that your country possesses, uh, where you are entitled to certain kinds of benefits. For example, nobody can enter your border without your permission. Now, that is territorial sovereignty. And in case your country does something terribly wrong, I'm not getting into the legalities of it. You can read up about the chapter 6 of the UN Charter and the chapter 7 of the UN Charter if you wish to understand it more. In that case, there is a concept of derogation of sovereignty. So, what derogation of sovereignty basically does is that the country is entitled, any country for that matter, if let's just say Turkey is entitled to get into the borders of Syria. Uh, this was the olive branch incident, and it is allowed to get into the borders of Syria and conduct a particular action that it took. It was a surgical strike, and it was completely under the mandate of international law because derogation of sovereignty took place. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, where were we? We were discussing sovereignty. Yes. There was one answer that stated the ability, your international, basically your independent status internationally. Yes, that is uh, quite an apt definition. Any other takers? What is the concept of sovereignty? Seeing none? Okay. Sovereignty is basically the ability of a nation to conduct its own affairs without any external influence. That is basically what sovereignty means. So if we see the preamble of India, okay, India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, right? 5 words in which India has been described in the preamble. Each word has its own significant meaning. And the word sovereign there means that India is now finally independent of British influence in its affairs, and India will now be handling its affairs on its own. And how it will be handling those affairs is stated by the other 4 words. It will handle its own affairs in a socialist manner. It will handle socialist, well, debatable, but yeah, It will handle its affairs in a socialist manner. It will handle its affairs in a secular manner, again debatable. It will handle its affairs in a democratic manner, and it will be a republic of, yeah, it will be a republic basically. That is the base.
Can I plug something in? Just sorry, like I'm genuinely sorry, but uh,
Okay.
Mumbai Yuva Sansad is happening just 1 week after Park Street MUN, where we will be discussing the very same agenda, which
Mhm.
is the 42nd Amendment Bill of
Mhm.
1956. It is
Mhm.
around the times of emergency and stuff. So if you are interested in all those historic Lok Sabha stuff, then do register.
Can we? Fine. Now that we're done selling out, let's continue. Yeah. So yeah, basically that's what sovereignty is. Sovereignty is your ability to conduct your own affairs in an independent manner without any external influence. So remember that. That definition is very important. That definition is literally the reason why your nation even exists. And that definition is literally the reason why international law and domestic law are so different. Why? Because in domestic law, us, citizens of India, each citizen does not have sovereignty. We are subjects of Indian law and we are governed by Indian law. And we don't have to accept Indian law. Like we don't have a choice whether or not we want to accept a particular law or not. But the very fact that each nation has sovereignty, right? The very fact that it has sovereignty means it has to accept international law in order for that international law to be binding on it. So when an international law comes into place, um, firstly, the law gains validity by being there in the first place. But there is a second stage to it gaining validity, which is it has to be accepted by each particular country that well wants to accept it. And that is basically called ratification, right? So signing is basically I acknowledge this exists. Ratification is I adopt it. Just because I acknowledge something exists does not mean I adopt it on an international law level. On a national law level and a domestic law level, you don't have a choice. Law aya, you have to follow. There's no two ways about it. So yeah, major difference, incredibly important. Now that you know the concept of sovereignty, knowing the origin of the country is important. How did your country come into being? Was it a colony earlier, or was it always an independent body? Was it a monarchy earlier? Were there any revolutions? Right? For example, USSR, Russia now, right? Russia now is a part of the former USSR. Each nation that USSR split up into, they came into they came into existence after the USSR split up. So their origin is the splitting up of the USSR. The Republic of India's origin is post-independence, like post the entire non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, etc., etc., etc. Us gaining independence, the constitution, not the constitution, but basically, yeah, 1947, August 15th is basically when we came into existence, right? Or rather, not we, our country. What else? USA is a conglomeration of different states, right? It was earlier a colony. Then each of those colonies became states and they came together to form the United States, right? Even then, there was a union and there was a confederacy and a war was fought, right? And when the war was fought, when the South finally acceded to the United States of America, that's when the US as we know it now came into being. Another argument could be made that the US as we know now came into being when US finally bought Alaska in the 1800s, but you get the point, right? Knowing the origin of your country is very important. The official name of your country is also important. Why? Because that's how you'll be addressing yourself in committee. So India's official name is not India. India's official name is Republic of India. UK's official name is not United Kingdom. UK's official name is United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, right? So knowing your official name is very important. Why? Because that's how you'll be addressed in a formal setting. So knowing it is important. The type of government you have. Do you have a democracy? Do you have a dictatorship? I mean, nobody calls it a dictatorship anymore, but you know what it is. So here, when I say know the type of government you have, not just know the type of government you have de facto, also know the type of government you have de jure, right? Because ultimately, what matters when you're going to pitch something with the context of the type of government you have, The type of government you'll be pitching then is not your de facto type of government, it will be your de jure type of government. De facto basically means in fact, and de jure basically means in law, right? So you'll be pitching it basis your de jure type of government. So technically speaking, well, North Korea is democratic, technically speaking. The only issue is only one party always wins the vote by more than 90%. So it is still a democracy, so to speak. So yeah, know your type of government, not just de facto, but also de jure. De facto, wow. Heads of state, basically who are the leading leaders of your country, uh, and in what way do they impact the running of your country. Not very important, but knowing their names is advisable. Um, what is this? It's military scope. Okay. So yeah, what do you does your country have a military? If it does have a military, what are the various branches of the military? What is the strength of each branch? Again, not very important in most committees, but if you're in a security council, if you're in a military committee, more important. But good to know. And your capital, basically where in your country does the crux of your political power lie. Just knowing where it is enough. And what's your parliament building called if you have a parliament? What is that area called? What kind of, like, when do the meetings happen, etc., etc. Just basic stuff. Geopolitics, again, important to know. Why? Because geopolitics in several ways influences the kind of proposals that you will be making. What is geopolitics? Geopolitics is basically the relations that your nation has with other nations. Okay. So as is evident in the um, sub aspects or subtopics, alliances, right? Alliances here does not mean we're friends. Okay. In international law, remember this. In international law, there are no friends. There are only interests. So your alliances will be based not on friendships. Your alliances are based on shared interests. So you may have, so for example, India may have China as an ally in one committee and may not have China as an ally in another committee. So for example, if India is in a committee with regards to the promotion of Asian economy, then it might have China as an ally. But if it's in a committee that's talking about land, like border disputes, then it will definitely not have China as an ally, right? So the context matters. Your alliances are multifaceted. They have to be analyzed basis what is it that you're discussing, what is the context of the topic that you're discussing. So know your alliances relevant to your agenda. Participation in multilateral treaties slash organizations. Okay, so the UN is not the same as NATO. The UN is not the same as SEATO, right? What are NATO and SEATO? They are they're organizations created by the enforcement of multilateral multinational treaties, right? It's literally called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? So your nation's participation in such treaties would heavily influence the kind of proposals you make in committee, and who basically you throw under the bus, if at all you're throwing under the bus, and who you negotiate with when you're in committee, right? For example, NATO in its charter has a clause that calls for collective defense. If any one NATO member is attacked, all of NATO comes to their defense, basically, right? Now, just knowing that and knowing that your nation is a part of NATO would heavily influence how you're going to be pitching stuff, especially if you're in a committee that's discussing a military aspect or a military agenda, right? So knowing such things is important. For example, India is a part of your BRICS, which is basically it's more of an economic um, it's more of an economic conglomeration of nations. Their their goal is not to their goal is not military cooperation. Their goal is economic cooperation. So if we're negotiating with Russia, if we're negotiating with Brazil, if we're negotiating China, yes, if you're negotiating with China in these particular regards, then obviously the fact that if you're India, that is the fact that you are a part of BRICS would heavily influence the manner in which you negotiate with those nations, right? So knowing that is important. Um, Conflicts, yes. So now conflicts here, by conflicts I mean conflicts with regards to um, the agenda at hand. So if you are directly involved in the agenda at hand, if you are a major stakeholder in the agenda at hand, um, do you have any conflicts with any nations with regards to that particular agenda? Because of course, if you do, then it will affect the way you negotiate that agenda in committee, and it will also affect the way in which, um, yeah, it will affect the way in which you negotiate in committee, and it will also affect the way in which you, um, well, deal with those particular nations in committee. So yeah, important to know. And trade partners. Again, trade partners, whom do you share trade interests with? Whom are you trading with? Major imports, exports, major import partners, export partners, etc. Now your economy. What type of economy do you have? Are you a purely capitalistic country like capitalistic? Wow. Are you a purely capitalist country like the United States of America? Are you a capitalist country like Russia, or for that matter, China? Um, China, although I mean CCCP is in power, so yeah, it's it's nuanced, but you get the point, right? Know the kind of economy that your country has. The GDP of a country, again, more important in trade-related agendas and trade-related committees, but always good to know. Natural resources, what you have to offer, and what are you using, what local resources are you using to fuel your industry? What kind of industry do you have in your nation, right? um, what is the scope of those industries, in to what extent are those industries reliant on locally sourced resources rather than importing raw materials and then exporting finished goods, right? Etc., etc. Your major exports and imports, definitely very important. Wait, why did I maximize the chat? My bad. um, yeah, major exports and imports, again, very important. um, and general quality of life. Basically, are your people happy with the way the economy is run? And the answer to this, no matter what the facts say, is always yes. Always. If you're North Korea, the people in North Korea are very happy. They are the happiest they can ever be. If you're in India, again, the people in India are very happy with how the country is being run, because that is what your nation's policy is going to be, right? At that time, your personal opinions do not matter. Your nation's interest, whatever nation you are allotted, that nation's interests matter, right? And finally, demography. Again, not a very important aspect, but good to know. Why? Because again, it influences what you're going to be negotiating and what you're going to be pitching in committee. What is your population, your ethnic composition, your linguistic composition, religious composition, racial composition? Um, how many people are in the working age? What kind of, do you have any social security measures? If you don't, what kind of benefits do retirees get? What kind of policies are in place for children? Again, you don't need to know all of this for every committee. Only research the stuff that is relevant to you, relevant to your agenda. Okay, do not waste time researching aspects of this that are not relevant to your agenda, because this itself is a huge rabbit hole. It will take weeks for you to just completely research this. If you try to go into like an incredible amount of detail. So just research the relevant stuff. It is good information. It will inform your decision. It will never be your decision. So yeah, let's move on. Background of the agenda. Yes. A function. So the reason I say functionally detailed understanding here is because when you understand an agenda, when you try to understand an agenda, uh, again, you can go into an immense amount of depth. Okay. Uh, like it is any agenda that is discussed on in an MUN, or any agenda of global importance, has so many facets to it that it is possible to spend entire month. You can literally write academic papers on that stuff. Okay, so why I say functionally detailed is because understand the agenda in detail, but only those details that are again relevant to your committee, relevant to your contribution in committee, right? Hence, your understanding does not only have to be detailed, it has to be functional. If the detail does not serve a purpose in your argumentation, there is no point in knowing that detail, at least for this particular MUN. If you read it for an agenda, if you read it for because you're interested later, great. You're a better person than I. But yeah, when researching for an MUN, keep it functional. Very important. So yeah, now why do we need a functionally detailed understanding is so that you can formulate your proposals in a manner that is firstly relevant, applicable, logical, and secondly, it is compliant with international law. Because if your proposal is not compliant with international law, even if the agenda is incredibly important, it will not be uh, considered. It will be out of order. People will raise a point of order on you, and your proposal will basically be shot down. Or they will just bring it up in a moderated caucus if they want to discuss your particular proposal, and then there they'll shoot it down on grounds of it not being in compliance with international law. And obviously, it has to be in line with your policy. So if your foreign policy permits you to make a proposal, only then you make that proposal. If your foreign policy does not permit you to make that proposal, then you can't make that proposal. Why? Because you would lose traction in the form of deviating from your foreign policy. And your foreign policy is basically determined from your nation's interests. So technically, what you're doing is making a proposal that is against your own interests. It is basically it's basically like um, okay, it's basically the LGBTQ movement choosing the Catholic Church to represent it. You get the point. So yeah, that's basically that. So if your proposal is not in line with your foreign policy, there is no point in having that proposal in the first place. Um, so yeah, clearly. So now, how do you? What are the aspects to research there? Clearly define the scope of the agenda. This will help you stay relevant. Yes. So scope of the agenda, right? What is the scope of the agenda? Um, any when you okay so when you play a game or when you're in a negotiation, there is always a scope to that game or a scope to that negotiation, right? There are these boundaries outside which everything is irrelevant, right? Even when you're talking about an agenda in an MUN, there are certain boundaries. The agenda needs to be defined. So the first thing you do when you're researching the background of the agenda is you define the agenda. What are the boundaries within which I am going to be playing? And if anything is discussed in committee that is not a part of that boundary, should it be addressed? If not, I will have to bring to the committee's notice that that is irrelevant. Why? Because it does not fit the scope of the agenda, and hence we'll need to get back on track. Right? In a trade committee, you wouldn't discuss the military. Similarly, in a military committee, you would not discuss trade, right? So setting a scope to the agenda is very important. When I'm talking about the South China Sea issue, South China Sea is an old issue now. Let's think about a new issue. Okay, if I'm talking about border conflicts, right? With special emphasis of Indochina and special emphasis of, give me another border conflict. Okay, let's just say special emphasis on Indochina. Okay, so yeah, if we're talking about border conflicts with special emphasis on Indochina, we won't be talking about some other border conflict, right? We won't talk about the Arctic Ocean issue. Why? Because our border conflict is has an emphasis on Indochina, right? So know this. Even if the agenda is border conflicts, your scope is limited to Indochina. So you can obviously use information from other border conflicts to guide how you're going to be pitching and what you're going to be proposing in this agenda. But any argumentation you make has to be relevant to Indochina. It cannot be relevant to the Arctic issue, or it cannot be relevant to the South China Sea issue, right? So yeah, basically that. Define a scope of the agenda so that you can stay relevant and you can keep other people relevant. Because if anybody spirals out of control, yeah, Taiwan. I mean, it's not technically a border dispute. But okay, fine. Um, but yeah, that's basically the point. Now, second aspect is identify and answer key questions about the agenda. First question is causation. What causes this issue? Now, here the agenda can be divided into issues and sub issues, or you can tackle the agenda as a whole. What I would recommend, again, in the interest of structure, is divide the agenda into like 2 or 3 issues, and then handle each issue separately, or handle each issue on its own, and then look for a logical nexus in how you've handled each issue. Now, obviously, each issue should also have a logical nexus in them beforehand. But yeah, at least that's how I do it. You can choose to tackle the entire agenda as a whole, whatever is uh, most important to you. So yeah, when you're researching, the first thing you research is what caused it. Why does this issue exist in the first place, right? What is the source of this issue? Once you understand the source, who is impacted by this issue? Who are the major stakeholders, right? In what ways is this issue manifesting itself? That rather, in what ways is the manifestation of this issue affecting people, and not just, like, when I say people, not just people, but also uh, nations, organizations, availability of natural resources, etc., etc. Basically, what is the scope of this issue's impact? If the issue was an atom bomb, how far does the mushroom cloud go, basically, is what we're researching here. And where is this issue most prevalent? Now, this question has multiple answers, where, depending on what context it is, right? So if it's a military committee, if it's a committee that's discussing a military agenda, your prevalence will basically be basis military stuff. So research that. If it's a trade related committee, then research the prevalence of that issue in trade. How does it foster international trade, or how does it hamper international trade? And make sure you're using credible sources of information. Yes, very, very important. Wikipedia is not a credible source. A lot of people allow Reuters. If I was given my way, even Reuters would not be a credible source. But yeah, um, news, blogs, Wikipedia, they're not credible sources. A list of, as mentioned in the PPT, a list of credible sources is given in the end. So we'll be going through that as well. I mean, it's more of you having to read it than me, because like we'll be reading together. But yeah. If you have any doubts with regards to the sources, you can ask me.
If I may just butt in for a second.
Sure.
Yeah, so while Wikipedia in itself is not a very reliable source, one thing I would recommend is that go to the references part of Wikipedia, because the idea behind Wikipedia is that it's an open source platform, right? Anyone can edit and add information. So most of the information that you have, don't read Wikipedia, but go down. You'll find a lot of PDFs. You'll find a lot of links. Those are very useful. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely true. But even then, when you're reading the links in Wikipedia, make sure the links that you're following through there are credible sources, government websites, UN documents, um, actual policy papers, etc. If the source cited in Wikipedia is uh, a blog, there's no point in following it. So yeah, country policy. Now, how does one research country policy? Uh, that's, I mean, it's a fun thing to handle, but it's not easy. Why? Because you will never find a document that lays down your foreign policy properly in one go. It's impossible to find such a document because such a document does not exist. So your foreign policy for a particular agenda um, has to be determined through. It does not have to be um, found. It has to be inferred. And how do you infer your country's foreign policy on a particular agenda? Through its participation in the UN. If there are any resolutions that have been that are in existence uh, based on that agenda, has your country participated in those resolutions or in those meetings? If yes, in what way has it participated? What were its statements? Did it sign that particular resolution? Did it vote in favor of that resolution? That is just UN related stuff. Um, any statements on that particular agenda that is made by the country in its official capacity, made by a government worker in their official capacity, made if there's anything in that country's official news source. So, for example, or news organization. So, quite a few countries have their own state news organization, right? For example, China has Xinhua, right? So, if there is something that is stated in Xinhua, then yes, that can be construed as a part. If it is a CCCP member that is saying something, as is quoted to say something in an article on that particular news organization, then yes, that can be considered policy. Why? Because it is a state-run news organization, right? So your foreign policy will never be obvious. It will have to be inferred. So yeah, a good starting place to learn your country's policies to research what your country's government, foreign ministry, or UN missions have said about the topic on their website. Okay, sorry about that. But yeah, that's a very good way of understanding what your foreign policy is. Some other sources of determining foreign policy are again relevant treaties, relevant conventions, or ratified public international law. Now, here again, what do I mean when I say ratified public international law? Okay, that means public international law, that is a law that exists on the international scale, that has been accepted and adopted by that particular country. Then it becomes a part of that country's foreign policy. If it has not been adopted by that country, then it does not influence that country's foreign policy. But if it has been adopted, then yes, it influences that country's foreign policy. Moving on, past international action. Yes. So here, okay. So here, when you talk about international action, right, we need to understand the political doctrine of legality and legitimacy. Um, let's talk about it from the aspect of the Adolf Eichmann problem. Okay. For some context, Adolf Eichmann was a member of the Nazi Party, and he was basically in charge of transporting uh, Jewish people to Auschwitz. So he was basically the guy who managed the trains. Now, when Germany finally surrendered, a lot of the Nazis were hunted, right? They were hunted for the Nuremberg trials. So a lot of Nazis fled to South America, and Adolf Eichmann was one of them. Now, I think in 56 or 60, some about that time, Israel had already come into existence by that time. And they had their own intelligence wing, which is the Mossad, right? So Mossad found out that Adolf Eichmann was holed up in South America. I think it was Argentina. Yeah, they found out that Adolf Eichmann was in Argentina, and they sent Mossad operatives to kidnap Adolf Eichmann. They kidnapped Adolf Eichmann, brought him back to Israel, and tried him in an Israeli court for crimes against Jewish people, crimes against the state, etc., 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 and crimes against humanity. Okay, now here we have a very interesting question that comes to mind. Uh, Technically speaking, was the action of okay, since Adolf Eichmann was a domestic subject, let's not discuss Adolf Eichmann. Let's discuss just Israel's actions here, okay? Um, so, legally speaking, on an international law perspective, was Israel's action legal? Technically, no. Why? They violated Argentina's sovereignty, kidnapped a member, technically a citizen or a resident of Argentina from Argentinian soil, brought him back forcibly to Israel, tried him under laws that didn't exist at the time of when the crimes were committed. So there was a retroactive application of law and sentenced him to death. Okay. So technically, was it legal? No. But was it legitimate? An argument can be made for yes. because the guy that they executed was a perpetrator of crimes against humanity. He was, technically speaking, a very, very, very bad man, right? So, was it legal? No. Was it legitimate? Probably, maybe. We don't know, right? So, this difference between legality and legitimacy is something that you can exploit in your research when you are formulating proposals, etc., etc., etc. Especially when it comes to proposals relating to or informed by past international action, right? Because what is past international action? Past international action is any actions that the UN or any particular nation have taken through law, through action, through policy, through whatever, to well resolve a particular agenda or come to an understanding and well resolution of a particular agenda, right? So past international action, as stated here, can come in the form of UN resolutions. It can come in now. A UN resolution is literally the UN proposing actions for an agenda. That's literally what a UN resolution is. UN resolution is okay, this committee of the United Nations, keeping so and so and so and so and so in mind, is making the following suggestions or the following proposals. That's literally what a resolution is, right? So that is international action. So yes, your research can be guided by such resolutions that already exist. Then there is international conventions and treaties. So now if you have a committee that's dealing with climate change, you can obviously take into account the Paris Accords, right? Paris Paris Accords? No, I don't think it's Paris Accords. Paris Accords was something else. The Paris Agreement, basically. Then if you are discussing trade or if you're discussing the sale of property internationally, then your Berne Convention comes into the picture. Your what else was there? Berne is trademarks. What was copyrights? I forgot. But yeah, these conventions come into picture, right? So there are international laws that already, international conventions and treaties that already deal with wide-ranging aspects in general slash particular manners. So even if it is not, even if a convention does not directly apply to your agenda, you can always find ways in which certain aspects of that convention um, apply to your agenda, and you can use that to give your proposal legal credibility. Because the moment you apply a convention or the moment you apply any international law to your proposal, by saying that, you know what, our proposal is guided under this section or under this paragraph or under this law, right? You are giving your proposal so that all important legal credibility. And once you do that, at least the base of your suggestion becomes watertight. Then the only thing that can be argued is the merit of that suggestion and not the source or the credibility of that suggestion. The credibility is in check. The only thing that's left then is the merit itself, which makes your job a lot easier in trying to convince committee. Another thing is actions by NGOs and international organizations. Now, these are again, they can be used to guide your actions insofar as what do we propose is done, but they won't provide you with much credibility for your suggestions. So keep that in mind when you're researching actions by NGOs and international organizations. And finally, you have unilateral actions taken by nations. This is again a very important a very important aspect of researching past international action, especially considering the dichotomy between legitimacy and legality. So yeah, let's continue. Yeah, possible solutions. So now, okay. So before we delve into possible solutions, we need to understand the difference between, or rather the dichotomy between, how far does possible solutions, at least researching possible solutions, go in informing your conduct in committee or informing your proposals in committee or informing your line of argumentation, right? When you're researching possible solutions, you research it in a very general sense, right? Because the very fact that you're calling it possible means it does not already exist. And if it does not already exist, how do you research it? You research it by reading up on similar issues that already have solutions, and you research those solutions. You find out in what ways those solutions would be valid to your agenda, and then you modify them and apply them to your agenda. So that's basically what you do. Ray, apologies, I have an important call coming again. Just give me a minute, I'll be back. Neelika, you can continue this line of thought while I finish this call.
Yeah,
Thanks.
all right.
Yeah, Nilika.
Okay, so possible solutions. I'm gonna skip and go to the next slide. What does the next slide have?
It's called important documents and credible
Okay.
documents and stuff that you can use
Okay,
to
cool.
Reuters.
All right. So I just want to know, like, till Pratham's back, do you all have any doubts so far as to, like, are you all confused about anything, any aspect of research so far? I'll take questions. No questions, right, till now?
Yeah, none.
Okay, cool.
Oh,
So
Navendra Kala has a question. Navendu Kala, sorry.
Should we spend approximately like every day on
every,
research?
honestly, so the time doesn't matter, you know, it's very subjective from person to person. Like sometimes a lot of people research really like in depth, but then sometimes, you know, when you're over researched, that could also be an issue, because then you're too flustered caring about all the content that you've accumulated, and you don't end up listening to the speeches in committee, which is not very advisable. So there is no time. It's up to you, like how clear are you about your concepts? Did you understand where your country stands? What other countries can you you know, join forces with? Are you thorough with your country specific and committee specific aspects? So it's very subjective. Like there's no time limit as such. You have to research every day. Some people just do it one night before, but they do it very thoroughly and, you know, very well. So like I can't really give you an estimate for that, but yeah, definitely, like you can do what Pratham already mentioned, you know, like the aspects. So I call this the country notebook exercise. That is where you cover the geography or GDP, blah 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 blah. So you can maintain like a notebook, and then you can, you know, also research up on the mandate of your committee, because that helps you you know, focus on the foundation. Then something, if you get bored of just reading, right, what I do personally is that I end up going on YouTube, and if I'm really bored, I watch the diplomats
Yeah,
of
that's
those
what I
particular
thought also.
countries, and like how are they talking, what reports did they produce, so stuff like that. So you can just mix it up and yeah, do your research smartly.
Thank you. And other than reading articles and YouTube, any other sources of information like
mm,
diverse?
UN archives is
What kind of information?
hmm.
What kind of
For the
information?
research?
So again, okay. So the kind of information you're looking for will guide what source you get that information from. So now, since we're discussing possible solutions right now, in the context of possible solutions, if you're researching possible solutions, then you would look at the UN archive. You would look for resolutions that deal with similar agendas, right? And you would try to find aspects of those resolutions that you can modify and fit in this context of this agenda. If you are talking about country profiles or foreign policies, then your sources would change. Then your sources would be more country specific in nature. You would try to find information from that country's official government websites or that country's official news organization if one exists, right? So the source depends on what is being researched. Now, the credibility of that source, however, is something that is objective. So, uh, blogs, Wikipedia article itself, most news organizations, they won't be credible sources. So, you may use them to guide your research, yes, but if you're asked to cite where you got that research from, then those won't be valid citations. Credibility basically means how authoritative is uh, credibility basically means how authoritative um, the source that you're getting your information from is. So that is why we'll have a list of credible sources in the end as well. If there are any additions to that for specific contexts, I will mention it then. So no need to worry about that. Now let's get back to possible solutions. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, no worries, no worries. So when we're talking about possible solutions, since such a thing does not already exist and cannot be researched, what you do is you find the next best thing, right? Solutions for similar agendas, resolutions on similar agendas, or agendas that have overarching overarching aspects. So, for example, if you're talking about the Middle East, you might have resolutions. If you're talking about the Middle East as a whole, you might have resolutions that talk about Syria specifically, talk about Iraq specifically, right? So those resolutions can help guide your solutions for the Middle East as a whole. So you can still use those resolutions as sources of information, sources of research, so that you can modify and use in this particular context. So basically, it's that. So the last line here is something pertinent to note. You can also amend existing UN actions in your solutions as long as they're legally valid, right? So this last paragraph that basically talks about building upon past solutions or building upon relevant solutions or related solutions is incredibly important. Why? Because not all of us are diplomats in real life, right? Not all of us are lawyers either in real life. These already existing solutions go a long way in helping us understand what we can actually do, right? So yes, past resolutions are a very good source of possible solutions. You can find possible solutions on certain websites as well, CFR, etc., etc., etc. But again, um, my personal pick would be past UN resolutions. I have found that so far past resolutions are the best. Uh, okay, now this is basically review stuff. So yeah, frequently used terminology at an MUN. Um, Roll call is present, present, and voting. Motions are basically um, okay. Motions are basically proposals to carry out procedure. That's what a motion is. So when you say motion to suspend formal debate and enter a moderated caucus, you are basically proposing to committee, hey guys, let's suspend formal debate and move into a moderated caucus on this particular sub agenda. And then the committee will decide whether or not they're okay with it. So your proposal will either be accepted or rejected, and you will either go ahead or carry on. Seconding is basically saying that, you know what, I completely agree with this motion. Like I'm in complete agreement with this motion. So seconding basically is a show of not support but a lack of opposition. So if there are no seconds to a motion that you propose, the motion fails automatically. There is no voting. And if there is no opposition to a motion that you propose, then again there is no voting. It passes automatically. So yeah, that's basically what seconding is. GSL is the GSL is formal debate, where that's technically the crux of an MUN debate, MUN discussion, not debate. My bad. Yeah, it's the crux of an MUN discussion, and that's where all the official stuff happens. Executive board is basically the presiding officers of a committee. Their job is to just make sure that the discussion happens as per procedure. And in case of an MUN, their job is also to critically evaluate each delegate's performance and ultimately decide the awards. Requesting a follow up to what? To a point of information.
Yeah.
Uh,
Need to
okay.
follow up.
Yeah, follow up is basically, okay, this guy didn't answer my question satisfactorily, so can I
Re-answer.
clarify my question further? Right to reply is right to reply is basically a power that you have as the representative of a sovereign nation to demand an apology from any nation or any delegate that has violated your sovereignty through their action in committee. So a right to reply is valid in three situations. Firstly, if um, any action is proposed that directly breaches your nation's sovereignty. Second, if any delegate insults your head of state. And third, if any delegate insults you, not in your capacity as a person, but in your capacity as a representative of that country, right? Those are three situations where a right to reply is valid. Point of parliamentary inquiry is basically you asking a doubt with regards to procedure. Point of personal privilege is you raising an issue that is preventing you from properly participating in committee. Now that issue may be physical in nature, I can't hear, I'm too cold, I'm too hot, etc. Or that issue may be more, well, more with regards to how committee is being run. For example, I don't feel I am recognized enough, right? A personal privilege is any issue that prevents you from participating in committee properly. That is the definition of a point of personal privilege, basically speaking. Moderated caucus is a part of informal debate. It is basically an informal discussion that is moderated upon by the executive board. It has a set number of speakers and it has a set topic, which is usually an aspect of the overarching agenda. Um, Quick recap. Yes. So research agenda through country's perspective, obviously, you are there as the representative of a country. You are not there as a person, as an individual. So as one of my mentors used to say, character mein raho. That's basically what you have to do. Stay in character. Stick to the foreign policies of your country, of course. Correct someone on a wrong statement. The reason I've put an asterisk there is because, yes, correcting somebody on a wrong statement is important, but only if that wrong statement is affecting debate. If if we are debating whether or not the thing in front of me is an apple, and the person comes in and says a factually inaccurate statement that that thing is blue in color, then yes, I would have to correct them that no, it's not blue, it's red in color. Why? Because the color of that object is important to whether or not it is an apple. But if the person comes in and says it looks funny, how it looks is not relevant to whether or not it is an apple. So I need not correct that. But the statement with regards to its color, I would have to correct because the color influences how that particular object is perceived. So correct someone on a wrong statement, but only if it is affecting debate. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. Ask questions to delegates on their speeches when floor is open to POIs. Yes, definitely ask questions, but make sure those questions are one relevant to good questions. Because if you use that time to ask a not good question, you are not just wasting time of the committee, but you are also preventing some another delegate from asking a more pertinent question. So don't do that. Questions are incredibly important, but make sure they're good questions. Use reliable sources to collect information, go through past actions thoroughly, determine alliances and conflicts, categorize your agenda and then research and lobby with people once conference starts. I personally am not a huge advocate of WhatsApp lobbying, but you don't really have a choice. You can't really lobby in person anymore. So yeah, good luck. But yeah, lobby. Lobbying is incredibly important. Please lobby. Please lobby. So yeah, now here's a list of some official sources. Uh, First one is the official United Nations portal. It's basically the home page of UN. The Charter of the United Nations is like the constitution of the UN. Any action that the UN does has to be in compliance with the charter. So knowing the charter is important. The charter will never provide you with a solution. The charter will just let you know whether or not any solution you are proposing is legal or not, whether it is backed by international law. So yeah, don't memorize the charter, but having the charter with you to refer to is important. UN systems is basically an address book for everything in the UN, so use that to your advantage. UN research guides. Okay, so these are all, yeah. So UN research guides are a good way of finding credible factual information. Um, so yeah, use them definitely. UN data is again another as another part of their databases, so you can use those.